I guarantee you someone is looking for her. There's someone out there, some family that's missing her.
To have part of her remains lost was very, very distressing.
The body was in under the canopy of the trees. There was no credit cards, there was no passport, there was no form of identification that could give this body a name.
Well, I became a small bit obsessive in as much that he never left my mind.
She was reasonably well dressed. She had car keys in her pocket. So someone has to be missing her.
Ballynamona is located between Kilmuckridge village and Blackwater village in County Wexford. A man who had been walking on the beach had discovered what he thought was human remains. I observed the remains on the shore, which was partly covered with sand and debris and obviously washed ashore with the easterly storm. I radioed back to the Garda station at Blackwater and contact was made to inform the coroner.
The Wexford coastline is where the St. George's Channel and the Irish Sea meet. It tends to be a hotspot, more or less, where human remains are either washed up or recovered by fishermen. I've been involved in approximately 30 cases involving unidentified remains. I was particularly interested in this case. The body was badly decomposed. When you've been in the sea for a period, you start to break up.
The remains were removed on the instructions of the coroner to Waterford University Hospital for post-mortem purposes. The jeans were rumour make. I made inquiries with the Lee company, which at the time was based in County Louth. They came back with information to me that the jeans were only made in Belgium. At the time, they did not retail within Ireland and retailed mainly in Europe.
She had laced footwear, dark brown, black footwear. They were made in France, and it a 4-star symbol on them.
When the woman was found, she had 2 car keys and a key ring in her pocket. Now, there aren't any photographs of the items, and the guards don't have them anymore, but we know from the description they were standard black Volkswagen keys, and they were on one of those football-type key rings a lot of people would have had at the time.
Back in 1995, Volkswagen could not give me the particular vehicle or even the make of a Volkswagen that it referred to. There was no car that was found abandoned around the country at that time that matched particular keys.
She had braces on her lower teeth. That's train tracks or whatever you want to call them. But if you can imagine, in 1995, it was most unusual for someone in their 20s or early 30s to have braces on their teeth.
When no positive identification was made within our own jurisdiction, obviously Interpol became involved and we had to prepare what's known as a black notice. A black notice is a notice that goes out to all Interpol countries and gives details of people that have been located, as the lady at Ballynamona Beach. That black notice was issued initially, I think, in February 1996.
6 months after the Ballynamona woman was found, there weren't any leads either here or abroad. The Gardaí still couldn't identify her, so the coroner instructed she be buried in Crosstown Cemetery. That happened in May 1996.
Our sister has gone to her rest in the peace of Christ. May we who mourn be reunited one day with our sister.
We put nylon ropes on the coffin, if it had to be removed, to be given to a family, that this would make it quite simple.
Well, at that time, there were a number of high-profile cases, women who'd been reported missing in the Leinster area, so it was only a matter of time before somebody was going to ask, do these remains belong to one of those women?
A hunting party were moving along the shoreline of Lough Ina when one of the party discovered what he believed were the remains of a body. The area around Lough Ina is part of Connemara National Park. The lake itself, Lough Ina, is fished quite extensively. The body itself was situated about 10 to 15 feet from the shoreline, but at that time it was quite a thick state forest. The body was in under the canopy of the trees.
Hello, guardship on it lifted. From base, you should make your way to Lough Ina. There's a body found there.
There was no credit cards, there was no passport, there was no form of identification that could give this body a name, which was quite unusual because he had quite a considerable amount of personal items. But clearly the priority for us in this case, and having consulted with the coroner, was to identify the body and to restore the remains back to the family or whoever may be looking for this person.
The statutory role of the coroner is to identify the deceased, how, when and where the death occurred. In the case where a body is not identified, we start off initially by establishing whether the death is a result of natural causes, unnatural causes, and if it's a result of unnatural causes, is there a criminal element in it, or is it an accident, or is it suicide?
It would be quite common when you find a body in the wild that it would have been subject to attack by vermin and other predators. But in this case, the body was fully intact and all the personal items were recovered. And the body was removed for post-mortem to University College Hospital in Galway. The following is a list of the personal effects: a hairbrush, a toilet roll, a pair of nail scissors, near Rosta brand, a manicure set bearing the logo Gold 5 West Germany, a Parker pen, a leather wallet containing €7.59 and the remains of a €20 note and a €5 note. A pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses in a case with a cloth bearing Optic Muckenheim, a bottle of aftershave, a plastic knife, spoon and fork, a bottle of Octraven eye drops, a Labello Balm stick, 2 packets of Tattoo brand tissues, a penknife, 8 Heiser Natron brand tablets, a Toblerone wrapping, timetable for Dublin to Cork and Tralee, and 2 plectrums, a litre container of Tropicana brand pink grapefruit juice, use by date 24 December 2005.
The Gardaí spoke to the distributor of the juice, and from the best before date, they were able to determine the man died around November 2005. That means the man's body lay undiscovered there at Lough Ina for over a year.
We were determined to leave no stone unturned to find the identity of this person.
External examination, brown hair, medium length. The post-mortem was done on the 10th of December 2006. It was a Sunday, I remember it distinctly. In this case, there was that mummification phenomenon. The rate of decomposition of a body is very much determined by the environmental conditions in which the body is and for how long it's there. The skin on the anterior chest has a desiccated, mummified appearance. It's dried out. There's significant decomposition to the tissues of the hands and feet. The shape of the skull and the pelvis suggests a male gender here. My examination of the skull and pelvis particularly and the general size of the individual suggested to me that it was a tall male. Natural dentition, no dentures, the two front teeth have been displaced. He had had significant dental work done, which suggested to me that it was somebody a little bit older. So my initial impression was that it was somebody middle-aged, over 65, and he certainly wasn't under 25, I would have said, so somewhere in that middle ground. In this case, the Garda photographer actually attended and took a detailed catalogue of all of the clothing, which might have provided a clue to where this individual had come from. My initial impression was that this seemed like somebody from somewhere else. Just the combination of the labels on the clothing and the nature of the clothing didn't suggest to me that it was somebody Irish, somebody local. One of the thoughts that crossed our mind was he a hill walker or somebody who had been pursuing outdoor activity that had gone astray or somehow lost his way in that area. We took a sample of vertebral DNA and retrieved that for analysis, and that was passed on to the Gardaí for them to send to the laboratory so that we would have a DNA profile for him.
So the original samples that came in the Lochina case was bone marrow and some scalp samples, so roots of hair can generate DNA profiles. Subsequently, when those things didn't work, we got more scalp sample in. We also got femur in, and again, that didn't work. With the Lochina man, obviously he'd been deceased for a while and we didn't know why it wouldn't work. And I had experience in my previous job where I used to generate DNA profiles from bones from gorillas that were from museums, so 100-year-old bones. So I knew gorillas and humans are quite similar. So I said, look, I'll try the approach that I know on the bones that we have here, and we'll see, does that work in a forensic context?
To have part of her remains lost was very, very distressing. It's absolutely impossible to understand how something as important as that could be mislaid.
When I came to work at Forensic Science Ireland, we didn't generate DNA profiles from bones because it's quite involved and it's quite a difficult technique. Previous to working at Forensic Science Ireland, I worked mostly on animal DNA. So that was my first year in the lab. I worked developing that in the background. Finally, a technique was developed that gave good high-quality profiles. Lochina was the first one I worked on, and we got a DNA profile from that.
We had a lot of contact with Interpol to see if they had any person fitting our description on their missing person list, but unfortunately those inquiries yielded nothing. We also had the DNA profile circulated to the DNA databases throughout Europe, and again we got a nil return from all the databases.
In the course of my career, I have examined almost 400 unidentified bodies. Fortunately, most of those were subsequently given a positive identification. Unfortunately, there are some still remain unidentified. Well, I was called to the mortuary in Galway Hospital to examine remains that had been recovered the previous year. The examination was quite startling because this individual had very, very high-class dentistry, expensive dentistry. When I saw it initially, it looked to me that it had been done in Germany. I had seen various examples before. It appeared to me to be German in origin. My findings were that this individual was aged between 40 and 60 years of age, that he was a smoker. He had dentistry commensurate with work that would have been done either in the armed services in Germany or in prison. They have a very extensive insurance program, and when you're in prison or in the army, you get the best. Yeah, and this was top notch. Top notch. Well, I became a small bit obsessive in as much that he never left my mind. I contacted the German Dental Association and I sent them some correspondence asking would they circulate the dental records that I had recorded, which they did, but nothing came of it, unfortunately.
The fact that there was no identification with the body, the mystery deepened.
Priscilla Clarke went missing in May 1988, and that was 7 years before the Balnamona woman was found. Now, Priscilla worked as a nanny for a family in Enniskerry, and she'd go horse riding often with Linda Kavanagh, who was her employer. They'd usually go through the Powerscourt estate and across the Dargle River, and it's believed that the two women somehow went into the water and were washed downstream. Linda Kavanagh's body was recovered 2 days later, but they never found Priscilla.
It's your worst nightmare to get a phone call to tell you that Priscilla's missing. We don't know, we've been searching for a period of time. There's a river involved, or maybe involved, in her being missing, and we'll continue searching. So your mind doesn't take in all that information, you're just hit by the shock, really. It took us through a story which was carried in a local paper in Wexford to learn about the remains being found. And even when we became aware of it, we were surprised to realise that there were similarities to Priscilla. We were told that they had cross-referenced this woman's remains with all of the missing women from that period of time, and that they hadn't found a match. So at that stage, they didn't advise any family of the remains having been found. Nobody contacted us. We got no phone call to say, even though it's a long shot, we have found remains in Wexford. It was a shock to realise that it didn't work that way. My sister described it as lost property in a railway station, where you had to actually go to the guards and ask them, do you have remains? So yeah, it was very, very disturbing. There were significant similarities to Priscilla. She took a size 39. She wore jeans, and she wore the particular brand of jeans. She had Volkswagen keys on her, and Priscilla had access to a Volkswagen car. And my memory of it was that at the time Priscilla went missing, the keys of the car that she had access to were also missing. So there was quite a lot of similarities. I just had to get to the bottom of it to know if it's possible that she could be Priscilla. So our next approach then was to contact the Department of Justice and ask that there would be an exhumation and DNA obtained from the remains. Efforts and lobbying and communication with everybody we could possibly communicate with at that time resulted in the agreement to exhume the remains.
years after the body was found at Lough Ina, the Gardaí still hadn't been able to identify this man, and the Galway coroner, Dr. Kieran McLaughlin, suggested they try facial reconstruction. They were really hoping that if they got an image out there of the man, somebody might recognise him.
Forensic facial reconstruction is the prediction of facial appearance from analysis of the skull. We do that in forensic investigations when the individual is unknown and when the police want to put an image out to the public in the hope that someone will recognise the individual and that will lead to identification. What we do isn't a form of identification, it's a tool for recognition that leads to identification. We're very rarely used. This is not a common process that's used within an investigation. So we tend to be used when already it's a difficult case, when already there's been lots of blind alleys, and it's really a way of finding a new path for the police. In the cases that we've done, there's about 65% of those cases have been identified. We had a centre at the University of Dundee. That work was done by my colleague, Greg Mahoney, but we worked together and peer review each other's work. So I remember the case coming in. When we're very familiar with a face, when it's somebody in our family or a friend or our neighbour, we remember their face holistically. So if you see that face from an unusual view, you'll still recognise the person if you know them very well. When you don't know somebody, you focus on detail rather than holistically. So you might remember they have a big nose or grey hair or whatever, glasses. And it'll be detail rather than holistic. When you know someone very well, you don't think about those detail information, you just think about their whole face. And of course, we're aiming these depictions at people who know the person well. They're the people who recognise the face.
While the process of identification was ongoing, he remained with us in the mortuary for a number of years, 3 years I believe it was, and he became known amongst the staff here as Lough Ina Man. So I used to come down to the mortuary from time to time and check in with the staff here to see if there was any updates on our friend Lough Ina Man, to see if any updates were forthcoming on his identification. So yes, he definitely stayed with us.
I got involved in this case at the time. There was a question raised in the Dáil as to whether the remains belonged to Priscilla Clarke. Getting permission to exhume a body involves a lot of offices. You have to get permission from the coroner, you have to get permission from the Minister for Justice and the County Council. Rather than upset anybody visiting the graveyard, we started the exhumation at 4:30 in the morning and had it completed before the graveyard opened to the public. I escorted the remains up to the state pathologist's office, Professor Cassidy at the time, to carry out a post-mortem. But our own forensic science laboratory at that time wasn't able to generate a profile from the remains that we could compare against Priscilla's. I took 2 of the bones from the arms of the deceased and put them into a steel case for the purpose of taking them over to Birmingham to see if they could extract a DNA profile from the bones. I was satisfied that they would be capable of generating a profile, and they didn't let me down. At the time of the original post-mortem examination, the skull was taken away to be further examined. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, that skull went missing. When we exhumed the remains in 2007, obviously it wasn't present, and despite all the searches since then, has never been found.
In November 2007, the then Garda Commissioner Noel Conroy wrote to the Department of Justice. Now, he gave a detailed explanation as to why he was recommending the Ballinamona woman should be exhumed. He wrote, "In an attempt to progress the investigation, the services of the then state pathologist, Dr. John Harbison, were enlisted, and on the 5th of April 1996, a second post-mortem was carried out at Waterford Regional Hospital. Dr. Harbison removed the skull and lower jaw for further examination and also took some samples of flesh. No written report exists from Dr. Harbison on his findings. It also appears that the samples taken possession of by Dr. Harbison cannot now be located."
We got the information that the woman's remains did not have her skull. That was very upsetting to find out. Very, very, very upsetting.
Priscilla Clarke's family had lobbied the Department of Justice to have the Ballinamona woman's remains exhumed so a DNA profile could be obtained and checked against Priscilla's. Now, that was done in November 2007, but when the remains were exhumed from Crosstown Cemetery, it was discovered the Ballinamona woman's skull wasn't with the rest of her remains.
To have part of her remains lost was very, very distressing. It's absolutely impossible to understand how something as important as that could be mislaid. Without this skull, we never know what she looked like.
We have to look after our deceased, and we do that. But what about the deceased that are unidentified? It's not known if it has been kept as a sample for something. It is not known has it been kept for carry out another methodology like facial approximation or something like that. A lot has changed since then, and I would be very surprised if anything like that would have even happened in the last 10 years or so.
At the time, there were a number of high-profile missing women in Ireland, including people like Imelda Keenan, Priscilla Clarke, Annie McCarrick, and numerous others. I asked the Forensic Science Laboratory to check that profile that I had obtained against the profile they had for those women, and I was told they didn't match any of them. Although it was a disappointment to the Clarke family, we were able to eliminate Priscilla as being the remains.
I got a phone call to say that the DNA profile didn't match that of our family. We were hopeful that it could possibly be Priscilla. And for us, that would have been very important. My father was elderly. He still thought of Priscilla every day. So she never left his life up to the age of 91 when he died. At the moment, the headstone we have erected for Dad just has her name on it. Priscilla Clarke, missing 1988. So that's the record that's there. We remember her, but we know she's not there. Yeah, it leaves you in a very difficult space. You know you have to keep searching, and you know that you have to keep thinking and being as positive as you possibly can. And you're just thinking every day, she's going to be found. She's going to be found today. This is the day. And the day passes and another day passes. It's an endless search still. It's the difficulty with a missing person. You can never have all the answers. You're left always churning questions in your mind.
What the Gardaí have to be wary of too is they don't want to create false hope. It's like a festering wound when someone's missing. All you're going to do is aggravate that wound unnecessarily. On the 30th of August 2008, we reburied her, the lady from Ballinamona. We went through a proper funeral ceremony We had a priest there and we reinterred her.
I do feel a connection with that woman because it is the opposite side of where we are. My own mother said that even if she's not her daughter, she's somebody's daughter, somebody's sister. That grave and that woman would have rested forever with nobody ever casting a thought on her. And that was wrong. She has a name. We don't know it yet, but she has a name, she has a family, and there is an obligation on the state to restore the identity. The Gardaí have a comprehensive website where they post photographs of missing people. They don't have any similar website where they publicise the unidentified, because families will follow those websites.
One of the ideas that I had was a database system that if the coroner's asked, or if investigating officers asked, or if the family asked, if the forensic scientist asked, what's happening in that particular case, we have the answer. As technology develops, forensic technology particularly, and it continues to improve, it is crucial to have knowledge of and access to any unidentified remains that had been examined maybe 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, or where techniques had not been as advanced as they are now. From now on, for example, any sampling that takes place should actually take into account possible advances. So we don't have to go back again and maybe exhume a body.
There's such a great silence around unidentified because they're voiceless. They have to depend on the institutions of the state to restore their names. The state has failed her and continues to fail her.
The positive aspect of the exhumation for the investigation is that we now actually have a DNA sample on file and on record. This DNA sample has now been provided also to Interpol. The black notice was reissued this year again, giving as much information as possible, again including the DNA profile. This case is very much open, very much active. Identification is the paramount.
Maybe she came off a ferry, maybe she went into the water from the UK or from France. But I believe myself that she is not from Ireland. I literally went through thousands of missing females on what's called the Doe Network, the website where they list all missing people who haven't been seen or have run away from home or believed murdered or believed dead. I was able to supply her DNA profile, her height, approximate age, clothing, etc., and send them off to Interpol. But to date, we haven't heard anything back. But I guarantee you, someone is looking for her. There's someone out there, some family, that's missing her.
Second to finding Priscilla and laying her to rest, getting identification for the woman who rests in Crosstown would be next of importance to me. To know who she was, what she looked like, and to give her back her identity.
We clearly had the body, we had DNA, we had the dental work, we had the personal items, and now we had the facial reconstruction. Sometimes you can have a lot of evidence, but you just need a little break. We carried out extensive inquiries with hotels, bed and breakfasts, initially in the Clifton, Galway area, and later through the Hotel Federation.
Clifton Guard Station here. Just inquired if a mail associated with you recently.
We circulated it throughout the country just to see could anyone help us. Perhaps that somebody had booked in, left personal items behind them, their passport, other clothing, and didn't return or didn't basically check out.
He's aged between 44 description threatening at all.
But again, that didn't yield anything. It was quite frustrating, but I was also very conscious that we had a lot. We clearly had the body, we had DNA, we had the dental work, we had the personal items, and now we had the facial reconstruction. It was now a question of getting all those elements together and pitching them at the right place and in the right location.
Most of the cases that we work on are challenging because the police are pretty good actually at identifying human remains. So when they come to us, it's because it's a very difficult case and they want to spark some interest in the public to get names that will lead to identification.
When we got the image through, it brings reality to the situation. It literally puts a face on the deceased and it personalises it, I think, and it probably gives us further determination to drive on and try and identify this person.
May we who mourn be reunited one day. Together, may we meet Christ Jesus when He, who is our life, appears in glory. Amen.
Loch Einaman was buried in 2009, and around that same time that facial reconstruction was being circulated through Interpol and through the media as well. Now at that stage his body had been at the mortuary for nearly 3 years, so the coroner instructed he be buried on Omey Island, which is just off the coast of North Connemara.
It was certainly a case that made an impression on me. It was also the feeling that it was a very lonely end to somebody's days, that they ended up in this very isolated location and had lain there for more than a year without being discovered. Why did he have no identification on him, which you would expect somebody who had been on a holiday or a tour or a walking expedition or something would have had some identification on them. Perhaps he didn't want to be identified or he didn't want to be found.
I was very conscious that we had a lot of evidence, but sometimes you can have a lot of evidence, but you just need a little break. And for me, the key was the cleaning cloth. Clearly that person went into that optician's in Nine Munster and purchased the sunglasses. Unfortunately, our inquiries with that particular establishment didn't really initially lead us anywhere. We thought there might be prescription and that he may be able to lead us to the identification of the person, but unfortunately that was not the case. And I was adamant that the key to unlocking this was still in that area of North Germany, Nine Munster. We drafted what we wanted in the press release. So that press release was translated into German and it was circulated in the local papers, not national papers, in the local papers circulating in the Nine Munster area of North Germany. The first person who came forward was a man by the name of Bernard Schmidt-Kram. And he'd been alerted by a friend who had seen the article in the paper, and he said, I believe that may be your brother, Arno Schmidt. But at the very same time, a lady who lived in the area of Nine Munster in North Germany also came forward to the authorities. Having looked at the facial reconstruction that was circulated by the media, she indicated to the German police, I believe that this was my neighbour and that he immigrated to Ireland in 2005. And she also named him as Arno Schmidt.
It was the end of 2005 when my brother travelled to Ireland. His last home was Neumünster.
I spoke to Bernard Schmidt-Kram over the phone and we established some detail in relation to his brother. And he told us that his brother had come to Ireland, but that he had lost contact with him.
Arno was always friendly and always popular. He was a guitar player and performed almost every weekend. And the years before he left, he moved from job to job. Arno was proud. Our family believed that he was successful. He had money and he lived comfortably. My brother made some mistakes and was in prison for 5 months for dealing with cannabis. I believe he had some dental work there.
So all the pieces were coming together and they certainly seemed to be fitting. But in order to advance the situation, we sought out the dental records for his brother from Germany, and in turn we brought them to Dr. Paul Keogh.
I received a phone call saying that they had records with regard to Loch Ina man, as he became known as. I compared the ante-mortem record which was provided to me and compared it to my post-mortem record. And I found concordance with no inconsistencies, so the records matched 100%. Yeah, it was a good moment.
Dr. Clifford, who was attached to Forensic Science Ireland, confirmed the DNA provided by Bernard Schmidt-Cram, that when he compared it with the DNA harvested from the body found in Loch Ina in the 8th of December 2005, he could say that they were brothers.
It's always really good when a case is identified through a recognition, always. And in this Loch Ina case, that was exactly what happened. It's incredibly important to get identification for human remains, and misidentification or non-identification can leave families not knowing what's happened to their relatives for many years. That can have a very traumatic effect. So it's incredibly important.
People are always asking me why I didn't search for him. But when he left Germany to settle in Ireland and to start their new life, he told me I would not hear from him. He asked me not to find him. It was his expressed wish that I would not look for him. In December 2005, he called me from Ireland to tell me that he was working in a call center near Kerry and said he would be spending some time with friends in the mountains in Ireland. He probably knew himself that was going to be his last call.
The body was found on the 8th of December 2006, so 8 years later we got a positive identification, which is quite remarkable, really.
When D.I. Carpenter explained me how long and how intensively they investigated in this case, I wished Arno had left a sign of who he is, a sign of identity. Also, I blamed myself I didn't actively search for him.
I called Bernard, we informed him of the identification. He would later travel over with his extended family. We brought him to the scene in Loch Ina and showed him the exact location where his brother died. And then we brought him to his resting place in Omagh.
The place on Omagh Island where Arno's grave is a very beautiful place. And there are wonderful people caring for his grave. This really touches me. We never thought of taking Arno home to Germany. I think Omagh Island is so wonderful. It's a perfect resting place.
We don't know the exact cause of death, but we do know that there was no trauma, there was no bony injuries, and certainly the manner in which he was found wouldn't indicate there was any foul play. I think everybody deserves to be buried and to get a final resting place. There's an onus on us to complete that circle, complete the identification, to bring closure for them. They need it.
There are lots of headstones in graveyards with unidentified male, unidentified female written on them throughout the country. We're duty bound, and even as a society, we've got to find out who these people are and repatriate them to their families.